Women's careers are being highly impacted by COVID-19 because they rely on other women to care for their children. These are nannies and caregivers. During the hard lockdown, many nannies could not go to work and the responsibility fell on mothers. Currently, the opening of schools has been delayed, as you know, and once again, women will have to make a plan. To speak to us about the impact on women in the workplace, I'm joined by gender activist Lisa Vetten. Lisa, I think for starters, it bears repeating and noting just how much of an indictment this is, that in a society such as ours, this conversation is framed as it is, that what to do with children when you need to go to work and schools are not opened is largely a conversation that is about women, doesn't it?
Exactly. I think there have been, certainly among some of my friends, I've heard reports of where you have both parents in the household. There's been an attempt to share child care, so it's not just falling on the woman. But I think we also have to bear in mind that South Africa is a very high number of female-headed households. There simply isn't another parent or adult in the house to help share. So I think what this does is it ends up just lengthening women's days. They need to be available to their children, ensure they're doing their homework. They're often doing teaching as well if things go online and they're in the position to have online teaching, so that they then end up starting their work. And I've seen this among some of my friends. They actually start their work at 7 o'clock at night and are working through till midnight. So it's had a considerable impact, I think, on lengthening their day, which was, of course, an obvious impact on their quality of life. And I think the other point that needs to be raised, Thulas, is that we seem to have these conversations, but we're not seeing a recognition in terms of companies or government as to how do we adapt to what is clearly a very significant change in ways of working that are probably not going to suddenly go back to the way they were after the lockdown ends.
That point you make, Lisa, is actually quite a good point, because in preparation for our conversation, I had a look at what other countries have been doing, and I was surprised that in the United Kingdom, well, not really surprised, I was impressed, let me say, to find out that this is actually a conversation that's been going on for months in terms of what is the plan now that there's lockdown and you have nowhere to send off your children to for a few hours. So why can't we get that similar conversation going in this country?
That's a very good question, Thulasizwe, and I think it speaks a lot to the way we just take care work broadly for granted. I think, for example, if we look at the way in which women who are running essential services like child protection services, older persons' homes, domestic violence shelters, no thought was given to them and their children, who was looking after their children while they were running essential services on behalf of the state. We haven't really thought about in relation to doctors and nurses. So periodically it becomes a factor, but in general we just assume someone's going to make a plan. I think also we've seen many companies are saying that in future they're thinking everyone's going to work remotely and from home. Well, we're in that conversation, the consideration of what that means for women and the impact on them. So it is an indictment, and I think it is something that needs to be taken up very seriously by the president. We've already seen the impact of the lockdown on the loss of women's jobs and their employment. We've seen how some of the hardest hit sectors have been domestic workers. So where are we going in future around the care economy of South Africa?
Are you able to talk to what the impact is, the socio-economic impact in an economy where already there's that pay parity, disparity rather, between men and women, and in terms of the advancement of women in terms of higher management positions and in the boardroom? This could set us back even in terms of those matrices, right?
Well, absolutely, because I think one of the reasons why women tend to earn less than men is that men spend longer hours at work. And they can do that because they can rely on women who are at home looking after children. And we can see it in time use studies. Women spend more time looking after children and cleaning than men do. So it's one of the reasons why men can get ahead. And you can actually see that the pay gap is probably greatest between women between the ages of about 45 and 55. And what you're seeing there, I think, is when they start having children, they start spending less time at work, so they don't come up for promotion, they don't come up for consideration. So you can see that at middle age, that's when it starts to hit and the pay gap starts to become greatest. So it's one of the great disappointments that it's one of the issues that we have not talked about in great depth and in great detail in South Africa, is because we are talking about long-term changes here, not a temporary little blip, but something that's going to affect us going forward in future. And who is doing the thinking about this?
Sure. Lisa Vetten, thank you for your insights. But here's a challenge. Noting and lamenting the situation is one thing, and you and I do this quite a lot, turning the issue over and over again, and a few months later and bringing it up. Who is going to take this up and champion it and put it front and center stage and make sure that there are appropriate policy interventions? Can we stop lamenting and actually start seeing people taking up these issues? Do we have any legislators that were elected there who are conscientious of their jobs and their duties? Any member of the executive who knows that there should be intervention? This is progressive.
We haven't seen, I think, the Department of Social Development, for instance, thinking sufficiently about this. The vast majority of NGOs and women that they are employing are all doing care work. So the Department of Social Development should be playing a very key role. I think NEDLAC should also be taking this up in terms of encouraging companies to look at childcare. So should the unions, but there are vast numbers of women who are not unionized. So there's a thought there that needs to be taken up. I think Business Unity South Africa needs to be thinking about this. And I think it needs to start being factored into economics. So we've seen some of the national income dynamic surveys that have looked at the impact of lockdown, the economic impact. They've started to look at some of the questions of care, but we haven't seen this being taken further forward and starting to be taken up in Parliament. So I think it's also a challenge to our parliamentary committees on labour, is to start saying to the Department of Labour, where is your thinking? Who are you pulling together? What are you doing in NEDLAC? Who is not in NEDLAC to have this conversation?
All right, Lisa Vetten, thank you for your insights. There's a challenge there among society's leaders. Let's see who takes it up and makes this their cause and champions it. Back to the